Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation, and I've got Melissa Nee from Metalchat Podcast. How you going, Mel?
I am well. Thank you for having me. It's early morning for me.
Well, it's late at night here, but that's the wonders of the time difference.
That's
Welcome. Great to have you back on Rock Daydream Nation again. I wanted to go back in a time travel machine back to 1980 and talk about the Black and Blue tour, which was Black Sabbath and Blue Oyster Cult. But I wanted to take it a year after and perhaps put a spotlight on two albums that were produced by both of those acts, Mob Rules, Black Sabbath, and Fire of Unknown Origin from Blue Oyster Cult. So the whole premise of this show is we'll talk about both albums, songs that we like, songs that maybe we don't like, maybe our preferred album, and maybe we can speculate what that actual tour was like, because they're two completely different types of acts, aren't they?
100%. Yeah, they are definitely.
Yeah. Why don't we talk about Mob Rules? So Black Sabbath, Ronnie James Dio. Were you a Black Sabbath Dio fan?
Yes, I was massive. I mean, I was a big Dio fan. I was a big Rainbow fan. So I was really excited. I love Heaven and Hell is one of my favorite Black Sabbath albums. I absolutely love them. That's the first tour that I saw. First time I ever saw Black Sabbath was that tour. It was not the Black and Blue because unfortunately, as I was telling Peter earlier, I was living in the Boston area and then I moved to Florida and the show missed me. We did not cross paths, but I have a lot of friends that went to that show, that went to the Black and Blue tour here in Boston that saw them in Worcester and at Hartford and whatnot. And it's a legendary show here in Boston. And it's one of those things, it's a badge of honor if you're of a certain age and you're like, because I have a friend, Jerry, who works with me, and that's his badge of honor is that he went and saw the Black and Blue tour.
Yeah, they're kind of like polar opposites sonically and lyrically, they're different. But from all accounts and all testimonies, it was a raging success and it actually did work. I interviewed Joe Bouchard, the bass player from Blue Oyster Cult, and he sort of said that the audiences were grooving on both bands, even though that there was some, bit of tension and argy-bargy behind the scenes between the bands, but the fans really grooved on these two bands. To me, it kind of it's inspired. It's an inspired sort of double billing, and one you probably wouldn't see these days, would you?
Not necessarily. You know, the thing is, and I did a show very early on in my podcast about heavy metal adjacent or bands that are not heavy metal bands, but heavy metal fans love, and BOC is one of them. They're just a band that, even though they're not heavy metal, those of us that are metalheads have always had a fondness for them. They're heavier live, and it just works. And you know, back in the day, you did find kind of odd pairings. You know, I've often talked about the fact that Iron Maiden opened for 38 Special back in the day, and that was seems like a little bit of a weird pairing, but it really wasn't at the time. And a lot of the same people that got to see Black Sabbath went to see Blue Oyster Cult. They were played on, you know, they were played on the radio, the same radio stations. They were in the same universe. They were in the same under the same sort of umbrella. There wasn't this hard genre specific where they plotting people into buckets like they do now.
Mm,
Back then it was a little bit more freeform. It was a little bit more like rock and roll, and they
yeah.
kind of covered the gamut.
I always thought Blue Oyster Cult was kind of a rock and roll band, but I get what you say that they're heavy metal adjacent, and probably the adjacent bit is that they've got a guitar hero, Buck Dharma, and he is a wonderful, soulful, melodic um, gunslinger. So I think that that's probably brings them into that sort of, the Black Sabbath fans love that, and there's quite a few of their songs that are very riffy. But this album, and we will talk about it as we get into the show, Fire of Unknown Origin, is it's not a metal album. It's very much new wavy, and poppy,
Psychedelic and yeah.
psychedelic. So, all right, why don't we talk about Mob Rules? So, Mob Rules came out in 1981. Bill Ward left, and you had Vinny Appice as the drummer.
Yep.
And a lot of folk say it's like a Heaven and Hell Part 2 with better production. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I think it is. I think it definitely is. I mean, the production is definitely a step up. I mean, I think that, when Black Sabbath had the Never Say Die tour, that didn't go particularly well. They were definitely on their uppers, as you like to say. And they regrouped and they came out with this fantastic album with Ronnie James Dio, and it put them back in the spotlight and it catapulted them back to where they belong. And so they're riding on this crest when Mob Rules comes out. Everyone's disappointed about the lack of Bill Ward. I mean, Vinny Appice is no joke, but Bill Ward is Bill Ward. He's a god among drummers, in my opinion. And he does a great job on this album. It's not like the album, in my opinion, really suffered by lack of Bill Ward. But and at this point too, Ronnie's doing most of the writing of the lyrics, so it's not like a Geezer Butler lyrical thing going on. It's Ronnie, and so in a lot of ways, this album is a precursor to what you're going to see in the Dio band.
Yes, 100%, 100%. It's sonically, it's a better album, and the same producer, Martin Birch, who's we're going to talk about as well with Fire of Unknown Origins.
He's a busy guy that year.
Very busy guy, and he's definitely pumped up the bass and the drums. It seems a lot clearer. Even with this album, Mel, Heaven and Hell, and the reissue, which I got on Rhino, it still seemed, I don't know if muddy is the right word, but it's not crystal clear. But when you hear the Mob Rules, oh wow, it's really the separation of instruments. It's just pristine, and especially the bottom end. So
yeah, they definitely did accent that, and which is interesting because you don't have Bill Ward, but Martin wasn't afraid to put Vinny out there, to put him front and center.
Yep. So let's talk about some tracks. Spotlight a track. What are your favorite songs off this album? What are the ones that you gravitate to every time you put it on?
I love this whole album. Spoiler alert, but Turn Up the Night is a great opener. It gets you right going. I love that song. I think it's a song that really works as an opener. I think it just sets everything off with a bang. Whereas the closer is not one of my favorite on the album. It's a good song, but it's for me, it's a weaker track on the track listings. Obviously, Mob Rules is a song that was the hit, was the one that got the airplay, is the one that everybody kind of knows is the title track. But for me, number one on that album, Sign of the Southern Cross.
Epic. You love the
everything
epic
about that song. Everything about that song, start to finish, lyrics, music, the whole shebang. It is one of my favorite songs of all time, not just one of my favorite off Mob Rules or one of my favorites in the Sabbath catalog. It's just a phenomenal song.
It's got a Gigantor sound. And speaking of Gigantor sound, my favorite song on this album is Falling Off the Edge of the World. I love that song. I love the start, and it's got this real melancholy feel to it. And
doomy.
And Iommi's got this wonderful tone, and it kind of sings sort of like a violin. And Ronnie's doing this really expressive vocal line, and then it goes really doomy, and it goes kind of quasi-Japanese opera, where it's like thundering drums and this doomy riff, and then the gong comes out. if anyone says that metal is like opera, this is the test case, because this is so dramatic. And then it suddenly goes into this really bassy, fast-paced riff, and Butler is just wrestling the bass guitar like a snake, with locked in with Appice on the drums. So this was the highlight for me when I saw Heaven and Hell when they did their tour. They played Australia, and to me, it was full of the drama. You had Ronnie, with the hand movements, and the lighting was all dark and had the sort of spotlight on him. To me, this is where I said metal is opera and opera is metal.
Especially with Dio.
I love this song.
Yeah, I love this song. I love this song too.
And it's tucked away right near the end. It's really interesting track listing. I would have pushed it right up. So what this song to me is probably what the Sign of the Southern Cross is to you. I like the deep cuts. Country Girl, I've grown to like that.
Oh yeah. It's different. Country Girl doesn't sound like your typical standard Sabbath song, but I think it's a really great song, and I think it's an interesting song, and I think that it fits on the album, even though it kind of takes you into a different direction.
But he can't write a straight song about women. There's always look out. There's always a sting. Evil. There's evil. Yeah, there's always a sting in the tail. Like that lady is starstruck. She's nothing like bad luck. It's in that genre.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
Lady Evil. So when he writes about the opposite sex, it's not he can't do it.
Not a love song.
He cannot do a straight love song unless you want to go to the Butterfly Ball or something. I don't even know if he writes a straight love song on that one.
No.
I love the little, E5150. I was playing that earlier. It's so doomy, and it feels like it belongs on the soundtrack to The Exorcist. Sort of all that, satanic back garble. That's kind of interesting. Doo-doo. That's do you like that? That's a pretty mighty riff.
Yeah, it's got a great riff. It's not a standout track on the album for me, but yeah, a lot of people like that song. They say it's kind of the sleeper on the album. Every song on this album is great. As we've talked about in the past, as many of us have talked about, you have all these great songs, but if you have a really great song that has, songs like Falling Off the Edge of the World or Mob Rules or Southern Cross on it, then the songs a song like Voodoo may have been catapulted better in a different album, you know what I mean? Depending on what it's surrounded by.
Yeah. Look, I think it was probably competing against this. I think this has got better songs, but this has better production. And that's not to say I don't like Mob Rules. I think it's a mighty album, but I just think that the songwriting on Heaven and Hell is just so up there. It's almost a 10 out of 10 album, if not. But it's just let down by that cruddy production. And one day,
9.5.
Yeah, one day somebody is going to be able to remaster it and just get it right, because it's a mystery. Martin Birch, I've spoken about this so many times. He is wildly inconsistent, because there are some albums he produces where the sound is, you feel like he's just having a cup of tea behind the console. Like some of those early Whitesnake albums sound terrible, but then he'll do Maiden and it's beautiful. It's superb. He's really, maybe he's more engaged with certain bands and the material. Somebody said that the problem with Martin Birch is that he didn't have his own studio. If he stayed put in his own studio and it was had it more controlled, there may have been more consistency in the way he was producing it. But because he's going to all these different locations, LA, Britain, Bahamas, wherever, it's up and down, and it's all dependent on the equipment that
Right, and
he's doing.
he's a slave to whatever the equipment is that happens to be there.
Yeah, so that's a theory. Tell us about the tour before we go
Well, before I
into.
do that, I do want to say there is one thing that I'm not really super fond of on this album, and that is that intro to Mob Rules. I think it's unnecessary.
Well, that's what I was just talking about. 5150.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I didn't even know there was a name to that thing.
yeah. It's called E5150.
I didn't even know that's what it was called. Yeah,
Yeah.
no need for it. It just
Okay.
doesn't, it's sort of just a waste of space.
Okay. I don't mind it. Something a little bit experimental. So, tell us about the tour. What was it like? Any
So,
memories?
I did see the tour. So what's funny is I was trying to figure out who opened for them. So I saw it in Jacksonville. And I was trying to figure out who opened, and I could not for the life of me remember. And I looked it up, and the band Doc Holliday opened. Now, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Doc Holliday. They were a Southern rock band. They were a blip on the radar for me. I don't think I saw them. I think we may have gotten there late. I have zero recollection of them at all. Like I said, I did see this tour, and it was so good. Ronnie's voice was amazing. I mean, it was sad that there was no Bill Ward. I mean, I was disappointed that there was no Bill Ward, but everybody else was firing on all cylinders. The lighting was excellent. They were very good at making a mood and
Mm,
sort of putting you into a mood. And like you were talking about the whole opera thing, like Ronnie just had a way of sucking you in to the story because he was so expressive. He was expressive in his mannerisms, and he was expressive obviously in his voice. And so there wasn't like stage antics. There wasn't like a big light show or, or a walk on Eddie or anything sort of theatrical in that sense. But they just had a way, Ronnie had a way of just making a mood that
yeah.
just exude whatever it was he was conveying, whatever the song was about, you felt it, you got there. Um, on this album, there's a lot of sailing away. I mean, that's sort of his thing. You can definitely tell that this lyrically is Ronnie James Dio. And it came through in the on the tour. I think it came through on the show that this was, kind of Ronnie telling you the stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of funny that Geezer is such a great lyricist, but he was relieved that Ronnie came into the band and took over the lyrics. Completely different sort of world. The Black Sabbath world with Ronnie is a different world altogether than Ozzy and Geezer Butler, because Geezer Butler, it's all about, yeah, they do talk about the mystical and the dark arts, but a lot of it is about warfare, what's
The
happening in the world,
environment,
religion,
yeah.
more grounded in the reality, whereas Ronnie is very much in the fantasy, and he loves to pose questions: heaven, hell, light and shade. He doesn't provide answers, but he poses questions
For you to
um,
think about.
to think about, and it's your interpretation. I'm sure he's got his own take on it, but he's not going to share it with you.
Right.
But he's an interesting lyricist, but it's a different world.
Yeah, I mean, Geezer's lyrics are more commentary on the world around him and what he sees in the world around him, where, like you say, Ronnie is more philosophical
Mm,
and more saying, there's something beyond this world and how that next realm affects this world. So it's just much more it's much more philosophical and much more, I don't want to say cerebral because that's not the right word, because Butler's lyrics are not jokey lyrics or
I think Geese is a wonderful lyricist. I think he's like the
absolutely 100%. And
Bob
he's
Dylan of
also very
metal.
thought-provoking. I think they're both thought-provoking in different ways. Probably the best.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One final question before we move on to Blue Oyster Cult. So you saw that show. Was it a sellout? Was that tour very successful?
It was at the Jacksonville Coliseum, which is an arena. I don't know how many people were there.
Hmm.
I was 15 years old. We were on the floor.
Yep.
There was a lot of people on the floor. You kind of pushed back then, you sort of, like now, I guess you sort of pushed your way up front. Back then, I was definitely pushing my way up front. I was fairly close. Um, I wasn't front row, but I was fairly close. I kind of pushed my way up, and obviously when you're that close, it's tight. It feels like there's a lot more people. So I didn't look behind me to see who was in the seats, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Talk for a minute. Can we talk for a minute about the cover?
Yeah, we can. We can.
Greg Hildebrand, what an amazing cover that is. It's just an interesting
And you can
cover.
see the demon on the sheet. Yeah, very interesting.
Really, really great cover.
I like this one.
Well, that's my favorite one. I have that hanging on my wall, so obviously that's my favorite. But the
Hello,
Van
Halen, ripping me off. All right, let's talk about Fire of Unknown Origin. So this came out in 1981. This is the actual, or the highest charting album. Double platinum, hit US number 24. This came out in June 81. Martin Birch produced it. What's your history with Blue Oyster Cult? Did you get this album in the day?
I did get this album in the day, and I love this album. It came out, like you said, in the summer of 81, and we listened to it the whole summer. It was such a good album, And again, it goes back to we listen to everything. It didn't have to be quote unquote metal. We listened to everything. And Burning for You was the big single, was the big hit, and it was all over the radio. And to this day, it's still all over the radio. Classic rock radio will always play that song.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know, a lot of people who don't know Blue Oyster Cult don't know that they've been around for 100 years and they have a bunch of albums, know the song.
I think the thing that first hits you when you hear it is it sounds very West Coast rock, a little bit sort of laid back, not quite Eagles or America or all that, but it is dabbling in a little bit of American-orientated rock. So Fire of Unknown Origin being the first song. But I think the thing that makes this band a cut above those types of acts is their lyrics are witty. They're very sharp. They've got a great sense of humor, and the musicianship is very, very good all the way down, from top to bottom. So by 1981, these are quite seasoned musicians, aren't they, Mel?
Yeah, they've been around. They've definitely been around for a minute.
Chemistry.
Yeah, and I think it's what's interesting about like Blue Oyster Cult versus sort of Black Sabbath is, everybody talks about Tony Iommi, right? Everybody talks about Ronnie James Dio, and people don't necessarily talk about the individual people. I mean, we do because we're geeks, but I mean your average person talk about the individual players in Blue Oyster Cult. These are not utility players. These are people who are legit musicians who are really, really good at their craft. And you talked a little bit about Buck Dharma. Ladies and gentlemen, he is a really, really talented guitarist.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a guitar hero. And I think they liked it that way. They were kind of anonymous. And I did ask Joe Bouchard, I said, he would actually joke about it, that he'd go through airports and down the street and never get recognized. Maybe Buck might get recognized from time to time, but they could just walk down the streets of New York and nobody would know who they are. But the BOC fans know who they are. They have a very feverish cult audience, even to this day, that buy every one of their albums and follow them to a T, so much that every word in their lyrics are analyzed. I mean, this band is you look at the topics in this band, it's a lot of science fiction. There's one particular song that was a that movie Heavy Metal, the
Yes.
cartoon. There was a whole song that was written, which was going to be a sequence in that movie. There's a song about the last man on Earth, sole survivor. Veterans of the Psychic Wars, talking about post-trauma, post-Vietnam War trauma. They just cover all different types of topics, and people have actually described them as the thinking man's Black Sabbath. I don't know if I agree, because I don't think sonically they're in the same
No, what I would
ballpark as Black Sabbath.
saying that then you're implying that Sabbath is not cerebral, and I think that they are. I think there's thinking going on in there as well. So I would disagree
Yeah,
with that.
I
But
know, I agree, but some harsh critics, Rolling Stone and all that, have described them as the thinking person's Black Sabbath. I don't know.
no, I disagree with that. But I think that the thing that also makes them sort of interesting is you got the song like Veteran of Psychic Wars, which is just a weird song. It's psychedelic. It has sort of that Hawkwind thing going on. It, every time I hear that song, I always think that they just they must have been like high on shrooms when they wrote it. You know what I mean? It just sort of
The
has like
tribal drums, it's like,
so weird. It's such a
we
weird
will rock
thing.
you. It's a little bit We Will Rock You, isn't it? The tribal drum.
Yeah, it's a great song. It's a weird song, but like you have to like the you talked about the subject matter, but they present it in such a different way, in such a sort of a fun way, and just a kind of a I don't want to say frivolous way, but in a way that maybe for some people is more palatable to get their point across. But it's just a strange song. I love this song, by the way, but it's a weird song.
I
And
like it
that's
too.
and the next song, Soul Survivor, those are the two songs that I think really showcase their psychedelic roots.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Uh,
Especially like Soul Survivor's lyrics kind of like I was just talking about Hawkwind. That could have been a Hawkwind song.
Yeah, well, it's a great lyric. It's about the last man on Earth and the despair that, he can't, there's nobody else, and, humanity is going to die with him. It's a really powerful lyric. I love their dark humor. I love Joan Crawford
Oh
rises
yeah.
from the grave, and you
I
hear
love that too.
Christina. I love that this band has got a lot of humor. Godzilla and Joan
Yeah,
Crawford, and
no, they're great at that. They're great at that. And I remember when this album came out, and we were young, I was 15 when this album came out, and you're like, why are they singing about Joan Crawford? That's just,
I think
you know what I mean?
I laughed my head off when I heard that. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
Hilarious. After Dark sounds like a Cars song. It's edgy. It's got that real spiky new wave song. That could have been a new wave hit. That's
yeah,
completely.
yeah. They have a
There's
lot of that sort of new wave, the keyboards and stuff like that. I
the
mean, they
tubes, like the tubes,
yes,
or
the two,
yeah,
and they go into a lot of different. There's songs that have time changes. I mean. The thing about Blue Oyster Cult that I've always loved and throughout their albums, and there's hit or misses, like, not every up to bat's a home run, but they are not afraid to take chances. They are
mm,
doing what they're doing. They're going to do their thing. They're going to throw whatever up against the wall and see if it works. And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And they're not afraid to take chances. And that's a sign of a true musician, somebody who isn't tied to wanting to be a rock star and trying to follow the trends. We've often talked about how somebody like a band like Kiss is always following the trends. They don't do that. They're like, this is who we are. This is what we like. We're going to make these albums. I mean, obviously they want to be successful. This is their job. It's paying their bills, but they want to express themselves in their own way, and you're on board or you're not on board. And I love the fact that they're just willing to take chances, that they're willing to put weird stuff out there. They're willing to put out stuff about, Joan Crawford rises from the grave, and people get it. Or most
mm, yeah. And I think this is the perfect timing, because this album sounds very 1981. So it definitely, I can understand why it sold more copies than their previous couple of albums. They were definitely picking up what was hip and happening. I mean, it had a little bit of hard rock edge. There was enough guitar soloing to appeal to the metal fans, but it also appealed to the new wavers and people that were liking synth pop or what was on the pop charts. So I think there's this thing about this album. It's a broad palette. There's a lot for everybody. And the more cerebral that love reading, reading lyrics, you can get your teeth into that because there's a lot there. And there are some lyrics there was one lyric, Burning for You was, Fire of Unknown Origin was co-written by Patti Smith.
Yeah.
Apparently the lyrics were written about Jim Morrison. So on one hand, you can look at the lyrics and think, oh, it's about a plague, takes over Earth, it's unexpected. But there's a point of contention that she co-wrote the lyrics or wrote the lyrics, and it was actually about Jim Morrison. Burning for You. You look at the lyrics, it's not a straightforward love song or sort of sentimental song. It's about these folks that are more mature, and they're burning rubber. They're going around America and they're looking for love. So it's all of the songs are a little bit edgy. There's nothing, even a romantic song or a song that you think is sentimental has a bit of edge. And that's what I like about this band.
Yeah, no, they definitely put their own spin on a subject.
So tell me about the tour. Did you see this tour?
I did see this tour, and it was an evening with, so there was no opener. And
Right.
I've often talked about the fact that two things. One, this is the first time that I ever saw Blue Oyster Cult. And two, they're heavier live. And I think that this is why maybe they work with bands like Black Sabbath, in that they are heavier live. The guitar definitely comes through more riffy, if you will. The keyboards are still there, but they're not really front and center. It definitely comes off as a harder rock band than I think you get on the album.
Mm.
And that show was packed. So I saw that in Lakeland Civic Center. It was a Friday night. I was actually living in St. Augustine, and I actually came home for the weekend, and we all took the trip down to Lakeland to see the show. Again, I was on the floor. So they're playing a good sized venue. The Lakeland Civic Center is an arena. I don't know exactly how many people it holds, but that's the big arena. That's where, you're seeing bands like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and stuff like that. So they weren't a club band by any stretch of the imagination. They were playing big venues.
Mm. Well, after this album, they never really hit the success, which is a shame. So I think a lot of their subsequent albums went further into American-orientated rock. And according to Joe, who said that they just hand over fist, they were spending money on just getting bogged down in production and just losing the essence of what made this band truly great. So I think this is a missed opportunity, because I think around the early 80s, Blue Oyster Cult were probably at their peak. And I know a lot of folk like those early albums, but to me, I think the early 80s, I love those albums.
Yes, I think that Cultosaurus is.
Yes.
I think that this is definitely their peak. It's definitely their peak commercially. We know that, because after that, they're not really playing arenas anymore, and they've sort of, then as the time has gone on, they've become more of, I don't want to say a cult band, but they've become more of a like I was saying before, like the average person knows Godzilla, or they know Burning for You, or Don't Fear the Reaper, and those are probably the three songs that they know, and they're not really interested in knowing anything else. And I actually had somebody one time accuse them of being sort of a one-hit wonder, and I was like, whoa, that's not the case. But they don't know, you know what I mean? Especially if you're younger and you don't remember the early 80s, that they were on the radio all the time, and that they were really, really popular, and that everybody owned their albums and everybody wanted to see them live, and that they were just as popular as any of the other bands out there that were touring, like your Black Sabbaths and your Judas Judas Priest and Iron Maiden were early on at that point, but that what they would become. But they kind of remind me of the band 38 Special, which again, that was sort of their peak as well, where they were a rock band. They were everywhere. They were on the radio all the time. They were selling out large arenas. They were getting on big tours, or they were doing their own big tours and having people open for them. And yeah, unfortunately, what comes up eventually comes down.
So we've covered both albums. So the Black and Blue tour, after listening to these albums, which came out the year after, can you sort of see how this tour actually worked?
Yes, absolutely. Because like I was saying, I think that they were a band that were not pigeonholed into, there wasn't like nobody in my high school went, oh, well, Black Sabbath is heavy metal and Blue Oyster Cult is not. They were talked about in the same vein. They were on the radio back to back. There wasn't really a separation of, you could hear Black Sabbath, you could hear you could hear Blue Oyster Cult, you could hear 38 Special, you could hear Led Zeppelin, you could hear, you know what I mean? There wasn't this genre specific splitting of bands. And so I think people were a lot more open-minded about that sort of thing. You kind of see that coming back now a little bit. You see bands like Dropkick Murphys on heavy metal festivals and things like that. So maybe it's coming back a little bit, but I think people back then were more open-minded to just rock music in general, whatever the rock music was. And like you said, a band like Blue Oyster Cult ticked a lot of boxes. So they had a little something for everybody. And the people from the 70s remembered them from the 70s. And the people from the 80s, they were like a radio hit band. And so they satisfied every customer. Whereas Black Sabbath obviously was a legacy band. And in a lot of ways, they were a legacy band and a new band at the same time.
Yeah, and Black Sabbath have, if you look at it, if it was like a bar graph, they've been in and out of favour. I think, in the late 80s, they were out of favour. And, with the reunion, they're back in favour and they're still at that pinnacle to this very day. But they've had their highs and lows. So I think every band, it was an interesting point that you were bringing up about Blue Oyster Cult being regarded as one-hit wonder. And I was just thinking in my head that classic rock radio really controls the narrative for a lot of new generation of music lovers, that this is the song and this is their legacy. And, how many folks think Deep Purple is Smoke on the Water without hearing Black Knight, Speed King, Highway Star, Child in Time? How many people just think Led Zeppelin is Black Dog, Stairway to Heaven? I know it's hard to believe, but there's a bit of a narrative. There are very controlled there's a lot of controlled playlists on certain classic rock acts.
Even Judas Priest. I mean, if you listen to classic rock radio and they're going to play Judas Priest, you're going to hear Got Another Thing Coming, Breaking the Law. Those are the only two songs you're going to hear.
Yeah. Yep.
You're not going to hear Genocide.
No.
I mean, and even Sirius XM. I don't know if you have Sirius where you are, but Sirius XM here in North America, which is supposedly, to counter terrestrial radio. But if you listen to like Ozzy's Boneyard, which is like classic metal, it's the same shit over and over and over again. They don't really get too far out of the box. And to be fair, we're geeks, but your average person probably doesn't really care about Soul Survivor, right? They probably aren't that interested in that song.
Yeah, so
it's just background music to them. They're in they're in their car, they're driving, and they're singing Godzilla or Burning for You or whatever. And it's just It's just to get them, at the stop, entertain them while they're at the stoplight. It's not sitting down and looking at cover art or looking at lyrics or getting into deep dives. That's for the people who are watching the show and the people who are doing the show. Your average person doesn't really care.
Hmm. Yeah, look, the narrative is definitely controlled, and Sirius is a lot of it's like an influencer. It's a radio station that influences people's
Right.
tastes. A lot of control. It's worldwide, and it's got a very limited playlist on certain acts. I think there are only a few breakout classic rock acts where people know the album and the deep tracks. And I'm thinking of Eagles, Fleetwood Mac, where their albums continue to sell and sell and sell and go into that cross generation. But bands like Blue Oyster Cult, where they're an album band,
They
they've
are.
never been a singles band. They're an album band, and to really appreciate them, you need to listen to the album from start to finish. It's a listening experience. It's not just a collection of songs, but this album, you've got to listen from start to finish, don't you?
I agree. I agree. And that kind of goes back to because when they started, AOR or album oriented rock was a thing and AOR radio was a thing. And so that's where they come from. That's their genesis. And
Mm,
so they're not coming from, they didn't start out as a band that's like, we got to make a hit. We got to get a video on MTV. We gotta sell our song for a jingle. We gotta like it. They didn't really come from that angle. Although, I mean, to be fair, I mean, a band like Kiss, who also came out in the 70s, did very much follow that angle. But
mm,
TLC wasn't. I mean, and maybe to their credit or to their detriment, depending on how you look at it, they've stayed true to themselves. And like I
yeah,
said, I mean, there's been albums that have come and gone, that are hit or miss for me personally, and on a wider scale. But they just keep doing interesting stuff, and it's always worth checking out. That being said, I didn't really like the last album, but that's another story for another time. But I feel like they're always trying to evolve and stay true to who they are.
yes, yes. I think the biggest hope for them to reach to a second generation or a third generation audience is there is a band called Ghost,
Yes.
which is always name checked with Blue Oyster Cult. And to be fair, I've seen Ghost live, and I've got a couple of their records, and there are similarities. It can't be denied. So that is the big hope, to get people to investigate Blue Oyster Cult and dig their records. So I
Yeah,
think
it's
that,
definitely, I mean, it's something, if you're reading about Ghost or and you see, oh, Blue Oyster Cult is name checked. Hopefully you say, hey, I don't know that much about this band, or oh yeah, I know that one song or those two songs or whatever, but maybe I'll take a chance and I'll check something, I'll check them out a little bit further. I'll get a little bit more of a deep dive going on. Yeah, you can definitely hear in Ghost, you can definitely hear that Blue Oyster Cult influence. I mean, they're kind
yeah,
of taking it to another level, to a poppier level and whatever, but you can definitely tell that Tobias is a fan of Blue Oyster Cult.
absolutely. Even if he says he isn't, well, even if he denies it, and I don't know if he
Yeah,
does
which
or
is,
not.
I
Yeah,
don't even understand that. That's such a weird thing. I don't even understand
yeah,
that. I
yeah.
don't know. Maybe it's just
Well,
part of it.
those who protest so much, it's actually a reality. So, Mel, wonderful to have you on the channel. Always
You
welcome.
too.
We will get you back on the channel for another chat. Look, you may, at the end of the show, folks, you might be saying, well, it's an album battle. It's not really an album battle. It's an album discussion. I am not going to adjudicate and go, I like this album better than the other. I like them both. But I thought it'd be fun just to have a comparison. Well, just to talk about both and see what they did a year later, and just sort of, paint a picture for the folks out there how these two bands that are wildly different but actually gelled as part of a double bill, a double concert bill, and it actually worked. So
Yes. I mean, you can't compare these two albums because they're apples and oranges.
yeah,
I mean, yes, they were both produced by Martin Birch, but they're apples and oranges, and they're both excellent in their own right.
absolutely. So it's a nil or draw. That's what I say. I like them both.
I do too.
Fantastic. So you can check Mel on Metalchat. Lots of different shows. You got anything coming up that you want to plug while we're?
So I was just at the Hell's Heroes Festival in Houston, Texas, and myself and my friend George have started our 4-part deep dive into the recap of Hell's Heroes. It was such a long call. I've had to split it up. So our latest episode that just dropped is day 1, the pre-show. So check that out. It's on all of the podcast platforms, Metal Chat with Melissa. And got some irons in the fire. So stay tuned for that. I'm also going to be going to Keep It True in Germany at the end of this month. So I will have some content regarding that. Always thank you for having me on the show. It's always a pleasure to be on the show. Even if it's early in the morning for me, I'd do it for you anytime, Pete.
No, wonderful to have you on, and we'll definitely do more shows in 2025. So, folks, tell us what you think about these two albums, favorite tracks. Maybe we love reading your comments. Favorite Blue Oyster Cult album, favorite Black Sabbath album. All comments are welcome. But one thing's for sure, you'll see both me and Mel doing more shows soon on Rock Daydream Nation. All the best and cheers.